In this video, I will show you a couple examples of ladder logic circuits. Notice in this example, on the left is the hydraulic schematic diagram and on the right is the electrical ladder diagram. The electrical components on the right are controlling the solenoid valve on the left, which controls the extension and retraction of the hydraulic cylinder. Here is the start button. It's a manual push button switch. If I were to depress that button, it connects this circuit and energizes the coil. It's labeled 1-CR, coil relay number 1. When that is energized, it closes the contacts for this relay here, and this one also is labeled 1-CR, so it closes those contacts as well. Now when that start button is released, notice that this coil remains energized because it's keeping itself energized because of this closed contact right here. You'll notice that this solenoid is energized, which actuates the valve. So this valve shifts, oil comes in here, and the oil in the rod end is allowed to flow back to tank, and this cylinder extends. And it continues extending until it pushes that limit switch, labeled 1-LS, limit switch number 1. When that limit switch is forced open, the coil is now de-energized, which opens those relay contacts, which means the solenoid is no longer energized, and so the valve can return to its spring-biased position, allowing oil to flow this way and oil from the blank end to flow back to tank, and it will retract the cylinder. Here's another example we can simulate. Notice the pneumatic circuit on the left and the electric ladder diagram on the right. Here's the cycle start button. It's just a manual push button. When we push that switch, it connects the circuit, energizes this coil, 1-CR, coil relay number 1, which closes this contact and closes this contact. When we release this push button, the coil stays energized because this set of contacts keeps it energized even though we've released this button. So the coil has closed some contacts, which is keeping itself energized. Now because this set of contacts is also closed, that solenoid number 1 is energized. Solenoid number 1 then would cause this valve to shift. When that valve is shifted, then pressurized air can come through this way, and the air on the rod end can vent to atmosphere. And that will cause the cylinder to extend until it trips limit switch number 1. Limit switch number 1 then gets pushed open, and because that's open, that coil de-energizes. And when that coil de-energizes, this solenoid number 1 is also de-energized. And it's important to note that that limit switch number 1 had two sets of contacts, one that was normally closed and one that was normally opened. This contact now closes, which energizes this coil. When that coil is energized, it closes this set of contacts as well as this set of contacts, which results in solenoid 2 being energized. Now because the solenoid 1 is now de-energized, we see that that can return to its spring-biased position, allowing compressed air to go into the rod end, and air from the blank end can now be vented to atmosphere. Solenoid 2 is energized, which means this valve shifts basically at the same time, which allows compressed air to go to the blank end of this cylinder and the air on the rod end to be vented to the atmosphere. So cylinder number 1 retracts at the same time that cylinder 2 is extending. Now the instant that cylinder 1 retracts off of limit switch number 1, this contact here goes back to the normally open position. But this coil stays energized because this set of contacts right here is closed, so this coil is keeping itself energized because it's closed these contacts, which means that the solenoid for this valve can stay energized while the cylinder extends. And that cylinder will extend until it trips limit switch number 2. When limit switch number 2 is pushed open, it will de-energize this coil because it's now an open circuit. And when that coil is de-energized, this contact is also opened, and solenoid 2 is now de-energized, which allows it to return to its spring-biased position. So compressed air now goes up to the rod end, and air in the blank end can be vented to the atmosphere, and that cylinder will retract. And these two cylinders are retracted, and they're held in that retracted state until someone pushes the cycle start button again.